Hi everyone, good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Alice woke up in the middle of the night and felt inexplicably anxious. The usual silence outside the window was disturbed by voices and some crackling. She opened her eyes and started to wake up her husband, who was snoring loudly. "Alex, Alex, can't you sleep?" Alex mumbled and rolled over to the other side and fell asleep again. "Do you hear?" "What?" "There's a noise outside. Go and see." Nothing ever happens in the middle of nowhere unless they're looking for a cow that didn't come home. And no one comes to our house, he continued, yawning. "Except for the big dog, there is nothing to steal from us. And the dog is silent, does not bark. Though I say." Alex sighed heavily and struggled to get out from under the blanket. "You're a coward. Now, I'll get dressed. I don't want to embarrass the locals with my underwear." He stopped talking, and then he listened and pushed the curtain aside. "Oh my God, the stones are on fire." "What?" Alice couldn't believe her ears. Alex grabbed his pants from the chair and rushed out of the room. On cotton legs, Alice went to the window and, looking at the blaze over the house across 2 streets, shrieked. Bright tongues of flame had nearly engulfed Diana Stone's house and were slowly creeping up on retired Fiona's neighbors' outbuildings. People were running with buckets, trying to calm the unrestrained elements, and Alice didn't see a fire truck. It was still dark and fresh outside, and the hands of the clock hanging over the bed were getting close to 3:30 in the morning. When she saw her husband rushing to help, Alice shook off her stupor and, making sure the children were sound asleep, hurried outside. As Alice ran to where the house engulfed in flames, a fire engine appeared on the hillside. Without a siren, it flew at breakneck speed and kicked up clouds of dust behind it. "They're here," Fiona hissed. A local woman stood across the street from the gate of her house, wearing a nightgown over a knit sweater, her usual colorful scarf tied around her head, and a small bag of belongings in her hands. "If they don't put it out, I'll just have to go to the woods," she sighed. "Everything will burn. All that is gained by labor. The grass is dry. The wind is still blowing. The flames could spread to my house." "They'll put it all out." Alice tried to calm her down, watching the firemen uncoiling the hoses. "How could they? By the time we woke them up, by the time they got water from the lake, the house was already gone. I remember when our neighbor's hut went up in flames in winter, it was the same. The whole street put it out, but to no avail." Fiona waved her hand. "Diana and her daughter are now homeless, but at least they managed to escape. I don't like her, but it's not Maybe's fault that her mother is like that." Alice looked at Fiona with bewilderment. The words of the always friendly and good-natured local resident came as a surprise to her. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously, fixing her long, disheveled hair. "Everybody gets what they deserve. Don't listen to me, I'm just saying. I don't know where they'll go now. They've been living here for years, and Diana has no friends. Her husband ran away. I heard that Diana's mother lives in one of the villages. I think it's nearby. She lives there, but they don't see each other. Not for 10 years. They had a falling out after the wedding. We should call them to us," Alice said. "It's so cold, and there's nothing to wait for. They'll stay with us for the time being. Will you come and have tea with us?" Fiona opened her eyes wide and shook her head. "Don't you dare take her into your house." "Why not?" Alice recoiled. "You live peacefully, so be happy. And with Diana, only trouble will be." Alice pulled up her sweater and looked for the burned-out people sitting on a log nearby. Diana was sobbing and clutching her head. Her dark hair was scattered over her shoulders, her clothes were smeared with soot, and her face was covered with the glare of the flames. Alice had known Diana for years, but they had never been friends. The Stone family had split up 6 years ago. Louis, Diana's husband, had left the village and hadn't been back since. Maidie, their daughter, had not long ago turned 7, and in September, she was to go to the 1st grade of the local school. The girl grew up friendly and sociable, quite different from her mother. And Diana worked in the village library and has always been very closed and peculiar. Existing in her own world, she did not want to let outsiders into it. Alice looked at Fiona reproachfully. "People are homeless, and besides, you yourself say that they have nowhere to go. I'll go and talk." "You shouldn't listen to me. I'm old, but I'm in my right mind, Fiona said quickly, pressing her lips together. Alice just waved her off, walked over to Diana and squatted down beside her. That's it, Diana sobbed, rubbing her already reddened eyes. It's all burned up. There was nothing left. We were asleep, and then there was a crack. She wanted to continue, but unable to speak, she covered her face with her hands. Maddie looked at her mother and the burnt house and held a toy in her arms. Hush, hush, Alice said quickly, putting her arm around her neighbor. Come to my place. You're both freezing. Diana took her hands away from her face and looked at Alice in disbelief. Why are you doing this? No one is immune to this. Come on, there's enough room for everyone, and then we'll decide what to do. Alice helped Diana up and taking Maddie by the hand, led them to her place. Noticing Alice waved at him and shouted, We're going home. Her husband nodded understandingly and ran for water again. It seemed that this battle with the maddening elements would soon be lost. Fiona was still standing across the street from her house and frowning, watched Alice and her guests. The kitchen was warm and cozy. Alice quickly set the table, happy that she had baked a fish pie and made soup the day before. She glanced at Diana and Maddie, who were sitting silently at the table. When the kettle was warm, Alice lowered herself into a chair, only now realizing how tired her legs were. Thank you, Diana said suddenly, wrapping her trembling hands around the mug of tea. If it weren't for you? You're welcome. Alice smiled, which made her green eyes with strange brown specks, which Alex jokingly called chocolate chips, almost filled with tears. I know how hard it is. When I was 5, our family was left homeless. We jumped out of the house in our clothes, didn't even have time to get our papers. I didn't know, Diana mumbled. It was a long time ago. We lived in another village then, and after we lost our house, we moved here for a while, to my grandmother's house and stayed here. It's a nice place, beautiful. She fell silent, and then added softly, You eat, and let's go to bed. You need to rest, at least a little. Diana, who had been watching what was happening, suddenly woke up and grabbed her head. I have to work in the morning. I'll take care of everything, and the whole village will know what happened by morning. Then we'll pick up our things and go to the store. You're kind, Alice. Alice blushed instantly. She didn't like to accept praise, believing that good deeds are a reward in themselves, so she got to her feet as soon as possible and began to talk. Finish your tea, and I'll make up the couch for you. Trying not to make any noise, she went to the big room and took out freshly ironed linens from the closet. She felt uneasy. Alice stood still for a second, listening to the voices coming from the kitchen, and shuddered as she remembered Fiona's words. She must have been joking. Alice whispered, trying to calm herself down. Diana hasn't lived here that long. How would Fiona know what kind of person she was if they hadn't interacted much? Finding no answer to her question, she sighed heavily and whipped up the feather pillows and headed for the kitchen. A tired Diana and Maddie collapsed on the couch, and a few minutes later were sound asleep. Alice sat in the kitchen and listened to the silence, broken only by the sounds coming from the street. It was dawning outside the window. The birds were singing. The neighbor's rooster was crowing. It was time to run to manage, but there was no strength for it. Alex still hadn't come back, and Alice was uneasy with the unknown. A few minutes later, the long-awaited creak of the front door was heard, and Alex came into the house. I'll get some clean clothes. Alice started to rush out, but then she came to her senses. Did you put it out? Fiona's house was defended, and that's good, and she didn't believe it till the last. I brought Diana and Maddie here. They can stay here for a while, if you don't mind. I wouldn't even ask. Let them stay. Good. Alex sighed with relief. She didn't know how Alex would treat strangers, especially since they could stay in their house for a long time. I'm going to get some clothes. Wait, Alice. Alex smiled tiredly. I'll wash first. I smell like that. There is no hot water. It is not warmed. I didn't even think about it. I don't care, just as long as I rinse off. Shaking her head, Alice rushed to warm the water. And when Alex, having hardly washed himself, came into the house, she started to set the table again. She was so tired that she could hardly keep on her feet and started to talk incessantly. You should lie down and rest. I can do it myself. Alex said tiredly. I'm fine. I fed the cattle, milked the cow, but I haven't cleaned it yet. A little later. Soon the children will wake up. You should have waited for me, he said reproachfully. Don't tell me you're going to start getting ready for work now. No, Alice smiled. I'll skip a day. You should. You shouldn't drive in such a state. It's a long way to the district center. Do you feel sorry for the car or for me? Alice put her arms at her sides and looked at her husband seriously, but unable to withstand his amazement, jumped with laughter. That's why I married you, he said suddenly. You never lose heart. And about the car, we will talk to you, Alice. I am very interested. Why suddenly you decided that a pile of iron is more important than my wife? At that moment there were footsteps in the corridor and Ginny came out from the corner. Not yet fully awake, the 8-year-old daughter stared at her mother in amazement. You're not going to work today. Not today. Diana Stone's house was on fire last night and we stayed up. Daddy helped put it out. Alice hesitated, then added quickly, Aunt Diana and Maddie are staying with us for a while. They're in the big room now sleeping. Where's the fire? Archie shouted, running into the kitchen. Quiet, Alice shouted at him. The guests are asleep in the big room. Archie opened his eyes wide and looked at his sister incomprehensibly. He had not long ago turned 5, so he was curious enough. Anticipating a steady stream of questions from her son, Alice quickly sent him to wash up. Mom, Ginny said, sitting down at the table. How long are they staying? I don't know yet, Alice said. That Maddie is so strange. I think she's a wonderful girl, always friendly. Ginny grimaced and reluctantly picked up a spoonful of porridge. She's always teasing, saying all sorts of things. You'll have to make a truce, said Alice, spreading butter on bread. The Stones will stay with us until the housing issue is resolved. Ginny looked hopefully at her tired father, but found no support in his eyes and sighed heavily. Alice opened her eyes and looked around confused, not realizing where she was or what time it was. She went over the events of the previous night in her mind and, remembering Diana, quickly jumped to her feet. 5 o'clock. Is that evening or morning? Alice muttered as she opened the curtains. Outside the window, the neighbor's chickens scampered about, and in the distance she could see the place where the Stones' modest wooden house had stood yesterday, the memory of which sent a chill down Alice's spine. The only thing she feared more than anything else in the world was fire, remembering her fear and numbness as a small and fragile girl who had come face to face with it. Alice suddenly realized that she hadn't done her chores, hadn't watered the tomatoes in the greenhouse, which were probably already wilted, and hadn't done anything else during the day. She strode quickly to the door leading into the hallway, and opening it, almost collided with Maddie. The girl drew back in surprise. Sorry, dear. Alice apologized. Is Mommy up yet? A long time ago, Maddie smiled. Good, where is she now? In the garden, helping Uncle Alex. Maddie looked at Alice with her sky blue eyes, then suddenly added, You have so many colors. It's so beautiful. Thank you, Alice mumbled, looking out the window at the garden. We do have a lot of flowers. Where are Archie and Ginny? In the room, watching cartoons. I don't like those. You go play, I'll go and do the chores. After stroking Diana's daughter's head, Alice went out into the hall and changed into street clothes. She hurried along the narrow path, surrounded by various flowers, to the cowshed and listened intensely, trying to find her husband. Everything is simple here, Alex was saying loudly to someone. Alice stopped abruptly. At that moment, Diana's quiet voice was heard. I have currants endlessly sick, with everything not sprayed, so I'll take note. Thank you. Oh, Alice, exclaimed her husband and waved his hand from behind the bushes. I thought you were asleep. Alice shook off her stupor and then walked over to her husband and Diana, who for some reason was dressed in men's shorts and an oversized t-shirt. I woke up. I remembered that I did not water the tomatoes and the management. Alice began, looking at the guest. Don't worry, I did everything. Alex waved away. By the way, I didn't dare to look for clothes for guests in your things, so I took what was at hand, from my own. And for Maddie? Alex laughed, and Diana could barely keep from laughing. Ginny gave her her own. Okay, Alice replied, blushing. I'll go make dinner then. She looked at Diana expectantly, and after thanking Alex again, she went into the house. Thank you again, Diana started to say when they reached the porch. Let's use the word you. Diana nodded contentedly. Do you need help with dinner? I'm not much use in the garden, but I can pull weeds or cook. Okay, Alice said. She was surprised to see that Diana wasn't as quiet as she thought she was. She looked much younger than her years, and she and Alice were about the same age, without the big round glasses and the faded blouse she wore to work. When Alice entered the house, she showed her guests what was where and went to the nursery. Archie was watching a cartoon, and Jenny was drawing something in her sketchbook. When her daughter saw her mom, she said, "Maddie thinks we're stupid." "Why would you say that?" "She said so," Jenny whispered. "Mom, will they be leaving soon?" Alice put her finger to her lips and quickly closed the door behind her. "It's rude to ask such things. They don't have a home at all. I told you that while they are staying with us." "Then I won't talk to her." "Suit yourself," Alice sighed. "Me neither," Archie blurted out and went back to watching the cartoon. "Okay, I'm gonna go cook. You guys turn off the TV and go outside. Help your father." Archie wanted to whine, but Alice looked at him so sternly that he immediately jumped off the bed and turned off the cartoons. "Run along. Otherwise, in a month it will already be fall, and there will be no more warmth." After taking the children outside, Alice returned to the kitchen, where she spent an hour in the company of Diana. The guest was not very talkative, but it was so until Alice went underground for pickles and Alex entered the house. At his sight, Diana, as if came to life, and from a silent woman left without a roof over her head, turned into a cheerful one. The whole evening Alice kept her eyes on her guest, and when it was time to go to bed, she couldn't sleep. "Can't sleep?" Alex asked, when his wife once again turned over from side to side. The moon was shining through the glass, throwing fanciful reflections. The room was fresh, and probably all the inhabitants of this small house had been asleep for a long time. Alice looked absent-mindedly at her husband and whispered, "How you like our guests?" "Yes, normally. Why?" "I don't know." "Alice, now that you've started, tell me what's going on." "The kids and Maddie had a falling out. They said they wouldn't be friends with her." "That's what you mean," Alex smiled. "Today they quarrel, tomorrow they'll make up. They're the same way among themselves." "And Diana, what do you think of her?" Alice blurted out and fell silent. "What do you mean?" "I think she smiles too much." "Do you? Are you jealous?" "No." Alex hugged her tightly and whispered, "Yes, you are. Don't you dare. You're my wife, and Diana is just our guest. A quiet, smiling woman. That's all." In the morning, Alice opened her eyes and, not finding her husband in bed, quickly rose to her feet. The house was quiet. Dawn was breaking outside the window. Quietly stepping on the homespun doormats, Alice looked into the kitchen and smiled. Alex was stirring porridge in a pot, yawning and stretching. "You're early today," she whispered. "I wanted to get everything done before you woke up." Alex smiled and kissed Alice on the cheek. "Do you want coffee?" Alice nodded and looked at her husband. "What?" He was surprised. "Just admiring." "At me? I haven't even washed my face. I got up and went straight to the kitchen. Or are you talking about yesterday again? About our guest?" "No, let's forget it. I'm still impressed. I don't remember you being jealous of anyone. Or have you?" Alice quickly opened the refrigerator and, taking out a can of milk, began to carefully pour it into the mug with coffee. Her cheeks were covered with a thick blush, and her hands trembled slightly with excitement. "Have you never been jealous of me?" "Every day." Alex laughed, and then added seriously, "You have nothing to worry about. Besides, Diana and Maddie won't stay with us long. They must have relatives, right?" "That's the thing, they don't. No one at all." Fiona said they had nowhere to go, but Diana's mother lives in the neighborhood, but they don't know each other. Turning off the porridge and covering it with the lid, Alex put his arm around Alice and said quietly, "Mom will never leave her daughter and granddaughter in trouble, right? So don't worry, talk to Diana. I think it will be resolved soon," he smiled. "I'm going to go wash up and get to work." Having had breakfast alone, Alice began to get ready for work. She worked at the biggest company in town as an accountant. Of course, the pay for such work was not so much, but a stable salary and a cozy workplace in a warm office was for the inhabitants of a small town a good option. After getting ready, Alice quickly put on makeup and got into her small car, bought on hand a few years ago. On the way to work, Alice had the annoying thought that soon Diana would wake up, and she and Alex would be home alone, not counting the kids. Of course, Alex was also working, mowing hay with the local men, raising cattle, and all this required a huge amount of time and effort. But even so, Alice could not push the bad thoughts away. "How jealous I am," she said angrily, looking at the road. "I must control myself. We have children, a common house, a household. Alex loves me." Alice fell silent and then sighed heavily. The sun, slowly rising above the horizon, was blinding. It was still cool outside, and the fresh air flowing into the car through the ajar window allowed Alice to wake up finally. In the distance finally showed a small wooden houses, which meant that in a few minutes she would enter the factory building, and only 8 hours later she could go home. Her colleagues greeted Alice with joy, especially Anna, her close friend, with whom they had worked together for over 10 years. "Good morning," Anna exclaimed, looking away from the mirror. "Good morning. Are you making yourself pretty?" Alice replied, sitting down at the table. "Of course, I can't do my makeup at home. I don't want to waste time. I'd rather sleep longer. Well, tell me, where were you yesterday?" It had been a long time since I had taken some time off. Alice told her friend about everything that had happened to her the previous day, and of course, shared her concerns. "You invited this Diana to your place?" Anna gasped. "A stranger?" "Anna. She lives nearby, and yes, I just couldn't pass by. You're just like always." Anna shook her head and, powdering her nose, put her makeup away in the bottom drawer of her desk. "If that lady is looking at Alex, and he's a man of substance, send her away." "I can't. They've got nowhere to go." "Oh, come on," Anna blurted out. Her gray-green eyes stared at her friend, and her blue-black curls lay in disorder on her shoulders. Anna was 2 years older than her colleague and had celebrated her 40th birthday last spring. She had a great deal of intelligence, prudence, and beauty, so she had a lot of admirers, most of whom hoped for a long and serious relationship. But all of them had nothing to do but to be satisfied with little, because Anna did not want to commit herself, and for good reason. "We must get rid of them," Anna continued. "Guests are guests, but it's too much to keep them here indefinitely. It's not for nothing that your neighbor Fiona warned you, is it? Talk to her. I think she might have some interesting things to say if you ask her. I was going to drop by Fiona's today anyway. I hope she's not mad at me. The sooner that Diana moves out, the better. I don't know what's going on." Alice smiled. "You know, even if she's imagining things, Alex doesn't care." "Are you sure?" Anna snorted, pulling the papers out of the folder. "A man will be faithful if you're around and if he really loves you. But when you're not, he can, and that's not our case." Alice interrupted her. Anna pressed her lips together and began to go through the sheets, and then, as if she couldn't stand the pause, she added, "There are other ways. I should know." That was the end of the conversation. Anna began to tell something on distracted topics, apparently trying to avoid a quarrel or misunderstanding. In the evening, when the working day was over, Alice bought a small sponge cake for tea and decided to go to Fiona's house, to apologize for her abruptness and to find out what she knew about the Stone family, who all these 3 years had lived in isolation. "Fiona!" Alice shouted, opening the gate and entering the yard. "Hello? Who's there?" A familiar voice sounded from afar. "I'm already running." "Froska, you've overturned the trough again. What's the matter with you?" "You take your time. It's Alice." From a large wooden building located at the end of the vegetable garden, a piglet squealing and a loud voice of Fiona, who, to all appearances, was arguing with the pig Frosia. After a couple of minutes she came outside and, adjusting the kerchief on her head, strode toward the house. "Alice, that's who I didn't expect to see." The landlady splashed her hands. "What's the matter?" "Oh, nothing much. I just thought I'd drop by for tea, if I may." Alice smiled slightly and handed her neighbor a bag of biscuits. Fiona stared at her neighbor's face for a couple of seconds, as if she were thinking about something, and then she said, "I think I know what you wanted to talk about. Let's go home." The small 2-room wooden house was cool and smelled of geraniums, which decorated the tiny windowsills like bright lights. In the annex that served as Fiona's kitchen was a large stove, and in the corner, over a table covered with a white tablecloth, hung icons. "Sit by the window," Fiona asked. "It's a place of honor for guests. The chair is freshly painted, freshly made, and I knitted the bedding for it. Do you like it?" "Very nice," praised Alice and settled down on the offered place. The hostess put an old enamel kettle on the fire, and then, placing saucers and cups on the table, sat opposite. While we're waiting for the boiling water, you can tell me about it, though it's all clear to me. Alice raised her eyebrows in surprise. Diana, right? How did you? I've known her since she was born. But Diane has only lived here for 3 years, Alice reminded her. Fiona grinned and shook her head. Her light blue eyes, framed by sparse, short lashes, looked at her neighbor curiously. Her mother, Betty, and I went to school together. We were thick as thieves. Then life divorced. I was here with my husband, and Betty was wandering around the north with her man. Then when she wised up and got divorced, she returned to her native village, where she lives now. Wow. Oh, yeah. Well, tell me what Diana's done now that you're here. Fiona took the boiling kettle off the fire, and having poured boiling water into the cups, began to cut a rich biscuit decorated with buttercream. Alice carefully began to tell about what had happened at home. She did not want to offend Fiona, because Diana was her friend's daughter. After outlining what had happened, she asked, "Why doesn't Diana ask her mother for help? They don't know each other." "Good." Fiona blurted out and sighed heavily, noticing the bewilderment on her guest's face. "Okay, if you're with the cake and apologies, then listen. I will start from afar, or you will not understand. Betty was born into a simple country family and always dreamed of a better life. But on her own misfortune, being in love and frivolous girl, got involved with one of the local guys, and after a couple of months came to her mother with a confession. Betty, how could you bring it in your hem? Shame on the whole village. What did you find in it?" Clapped her hands. The next morning, Bee's parents went to the house of her lover and thus decided the fate of their daughter. The wedding was simple. The belly was not yet visible. And in the spring, a charming daughter, Elizabeth, appeared in the young family. Frank did not want to work or study. The family was a burden to him, but under pressure from his parents decided that it would be better to go somewhere far away. Betty took the news of his imminent move to a small northern town in a huff. She tried to talk her husband out of it, but he was adamant. 10 years. For 10 years, she put up with her neglectful husband, and then she decided to run away. After gathering the bare necessities of life, Betty struggled to get to her home, and her mother took her in. And then a week later, she suddenly discovered that she had brought from her husband a gift that was to be born also next spring. The girl who was not expected, Diana, was born. She was 10 years younger than her older sister and so demanding, so lively and mischievous, that Betty said with a smile, "She'll grow up to be a joy to me. She'll be a helper." And Diana grew up, except that did not live up to Betty's expectations. The girl's helper did not turn out. Unlike her older sister, who was for her mother like a wand, Diana grew up capricious and very lazy. She did not want to study, never milked the cow, and from any business found skillful excuses. "You shouldn't spoil her." Fiona shook her head when she visited her home village and listened to her friends' lamentations. "You should send her away. Let her help and go to school after the 9th grade. There's no problem with that nowadays. She doesn't want to, you know." Betty sighed. "I'm telling you, and it's as if I'm talking to a wall. Elizabeth graduated from the institute, the first in our family with an education, but Diana says, 'Why should I study? She's going to marry a rich man.' No offense, but who needs such a lazy girl? I can see it myself, mister. Send her to a college, a technical school, anywhere. There's still a year before she graduates to get her grades up." But no matter how hard Betty tried to talk some sense into Diana, she failed. Her daughter somehow finished 9 grades and, having received a certificate, got a job cleaning floors in a kindergarten. They pay pennies, but even them Diana managed to squander only after receiving. And then she rounded up the husband of one of the teachers and jumped out to marry him. Betty, after such a scandal, a few weeks did not show on the street, so she was ashamed to catch the stares of acquaintances. However, marital happiness was short-lived, and soon Diana was again going to marry Louise, who was married and, in addition, had 2 children. Betty's patience was breaking. She tried to reason with her daughter, but Diana wouldn't listen to her. Soon after she and Louis signed, Betty decided to tell her daughter that she would no longer cover her debts and give her money. However, the heart-to-heart talk ended with the fact that the agitated mother had to be rushed to the hospital, and during her time there Diana never visited her. The eldest daughter, Elizabeth, came from the metropolis. She took time off work and nursed her mother until she was better. At that moment, Betty realized that she couldn't go on like this, and when she returned home, she sent her youngest daughter away. Fiona felt silent, then added with a sigh, "They haven't spoken to each other since." Good. Betty was like a human being. She didn't have to save her younger daughter, support her, and also pay debts to the neighbors. And yet so quiet, modest, muttered Alice. And how did she get a job in the library without education? Fiona blurted out, and breaking off a small piece of biscuit with a teaspoon, sent it into her mouth. "Do you know how to do debts?" Fiona grinned. "Our Victor, the head of the village council, is a fox. And Diana, she's not bad. She's got a fine figure, gorgeous hair, and she knows how to get her own way. But Victor's over 60. Alice blurted out and faltered. "When you live to our years, you will realize that despite the number in the passport, still feel like 18. Fiona smiled dreamily, then sipped her tea and added, "The attention alone is enough for him. He's married, after all, and Angela's got her eyes on him." "I see," Alice muttered. "But what should I do?" "Go to Victor and ask him to give Diana a place to live, at least a room in our 2-story building. Almost half of the apartments there are empty. Water is there or not, heating is the same story. Though knowing Diana, I would have thought she'd have already made arrangements for free accommodation." Fiona looked thoughtfully at her guest and muttered, "That's odd. You keep an eye on Alex. Don't let anything happen." Alice shook her head and pushed the empty teacup away from her. "That's out of the question. Since you came here, you must be worried," the neighbor said quickly. "And rightly so. Straws everywhere cannot be laid, but do not let your marriage on the sidelines too." "Thank you." "You're welcome. I wish you'd listened to me in the first place," Fiona sighed. Alice nodded. Only now she realized what she had done. She had willingly brought a stranger into the house who was not who she thought she was. Alice always tried to help people, empathize, and now these feelings played a cruel joke on her. Having promised to bring Fiona cottage cheese and milk, Alice said goodbye to her, got into the car, and drove home. The sun was already setting, and the cows were returning to the village from the field. They mowed lawn and walked reluctantly to their own gates. When Alice parked the car near the house, she was surprised to see Pestryanka chewing grass and wagging her tail angrily. "And you, why are you not at home?" Alice asked in surprise, opening the gate in front of the cow. "Come to the place." Having escorted the fugitive to the stall, Alice walked along the path leading to the house, without noticing a single living soul, entered the hay. "Mama," shouted Archie, jumping out to meet her. "You've been gone so long, and Dasha and I drew you a present. Only it's a secret." Alice smiled and patted her son's curly dark hair. "Great, where's Daddy?" "He's with Aunt Diana." "What's wrong?" Alice was worried. Instead of answering, Archie started gibbering about a cartoon character and pulled Alice into the house. In the kitchen, she noticed Diana. The guest was sitting at a large round table, covered with a blue tablecloth, and laughing. But when she saw her hostess, she immediately changed her face. "Good evening," she said dryly and smiled strangely. "Hello, Diana. How was your day?" "Good." Alex came out of the kitchen with cups of hot tea. "Hi, where have you been so long?" he asked. "I was late at work, and then I stopped by Fiona's house to see if she was all right. The last time I saw her was the night of the fire, and she was very frightened." Alice looked meaningfully at the pale Diana. "Warn me next time. I called you. Apparently, someone had turned off the sound on the phone again. Alex noticed. "Diana had a headache. I did all the work and decided to make her some herbal tea." "Is that all?" Alice grinned. "When I parked the car, Pestra was bored in front of the house." "Really?" The husband gasped. "She came by. I remember exactly." Or Alex looked at his wife confusedly, trying to remember the events of the previous evening. "It's nothing," Diana said with a smile. "Thank you, Alex. The tea is so fragrant." "You're welcome." Alice frowned and hurried out of the kitchen, so as not to say anything unnecessary. She wanted so much to tell her husband about everything she had learned from Fiona. However, Alice realized that she shouldn't do that. We need to proceed with caution. Who knows what plans this Diana has? Alice thought as she went to change. In the evening, when Alex went to the bath, Alice looked into the big room and smiled. "Diana, not busy?" "No," replied the guest. "Come in." "I wanted to talk about what happened the other night," Alice began. She sat down on the edge of the couch and looked at Diana with as much sympathy as she could muster. "I'm embarrassed to ask, but how did the fire happen?" "I don't know. I woke up, I grabbed Maddie's hand, and I went out the window." "You've been through a lot with her." "Yeah," Diana nodded, "but it's all behind us now. We should check with the head of the village council about housing. Victor will always help, and there are empty houses. I'll visit him one of these days." "Well, let's go to bed. Maddie's tired for the day." Realizing that the conversation for today is over and Diana no longer wants to discuss the residential issue, Alice wished them and her daughter good night and went to her room. A few minutes later, Alex returned from the bath. He threw a wet towel on the back of a chair and smiled. "Nice bath." Alex playfully looked at his wife, who didn't react to his words. Alice sat on the sofa and looked at one point. "What are you thinking about?" "Aya? You didn't even notice that I threw a wet towel." "It's nothing." "Oh, tell me what's wrong or I won't recognize you." "Nothing." "Alice." Alex stretched out, taking a seat across from her. Sighing, she brushed her tightly braided hair off her shoulder and whispered, "Diana doesn't seem like she's going to settle on a place to live. In fact, she's taking her time. It's been so little time, she probably hasn't gotten over it yet." "Really? That's why she was giggling at dinner." Alice sneered. "What do you suggest?" "Not to chase them out into the street, and there are no options yet." Alice smiled enigmatically and dropped her head onto the pillow. "I'll find my own options tomorrow," she said dryly and closed her eyes. "You'll see." That morning Alice got up earlier than usual so that she could stop by the village council and talk to Victor. "Where are you going like that?" Alex asked in surprise when he saw his wife near the mirror. In a flowing dress to the knees, with a deep neckline, Alice looked gorgeous. Her dark hair was scattered over her shoulders, cherry lipstick emphasized her lips, and her green eyes with brown speckles were full of determination. "To the village council, I'm going to go knock out housing for the burned-out people." "Maybe you should wear something more modest," Alex whispered. "Jealous? Of course I am." Alice grinned. "You're right. A wife should be appreciated." "I don't get it." He wanted to ask something, but Alice quickly went out into the hall. Alex rushed after her and stopped her at the door, not letting her go. "What's the hint? Let's talk before you leave the house." "I'm in a hurry." "And about appreciating your wife." "Am I wrong?" "Of course you're right, but—" "Alex, I have to get to the village hall and then I have to get to work. Oh, by the way, Diana's going to the library today too. So you're staying home to take charge and the kids will be with you for the time being. Kindergarten doesn't open for 2 weeks and you know what school is like." But she said she would be home for another week. "What?" Alice was amazed. "I thought you knew." "Well, Diana." Alice jumped out of the house and clutched her purse with such force that a little more would have left nail marks on it. She reached the one-story wooden building where the village council was located in a matter of minutes and was happy to find that Victor was already there. The small room, lit by the bright July sun, was stuffy and very dusty. The bulky wooden desk near the window could hardly hold the piles of papers and various books, and the closet opposite was full of documents. What was lacking here was a woman's hand, capable of turning an ugly room without curtains into a cozy workplace. But Victor considered his office to be his personal territory and would not allow his wife, Angela, to organize it under any pretext. "Good morning, Alice." He said hello. "What are you doing here at this early hour?" "Good morning. I wanted to talk to you about Diana. She is now living with my daughter." Victor coughed, and then offering his visitor a seat, muttered, "Well, that's even better. Tell Diana that the investigation is dragging on. It's unpleasant, but that's the way it is." Alice looked at the head of the village council in confusion and did not immediately realize what he was talking about. "I mean the investigation into the cause of the fire," he coughed. "As I was told, the case has become more complicated and more time is needed. They seem to suspect arson." "Is that possible?" "Everyone here is an insider." Victor leaned back in his wooden chair and sighed. "I don't know what to think. It's a pity for Louis. He's lost his home. It was a big house, but—" "Wait a minute, it's Diana's house." "No, it was Lou's mother's house. He inherited it before he married Diana. Louis did what a real man would do. He let his wife and daughter live here and left. Not everyone could do that. Victor fell silent and then apologized a lot. I keep saying, what did you want to ask, Alice? From confusion, Alice did not immediately realize why she had come, but taking control of herself finally decided. Diana and her daughter have nowhere to go. I've heard that we have a lot of empty houses, so maybe. Of course, I'd be happy to put a roof over their heads. It's just that Diana hadn't contacted me and I thought she'd already found a place to stay. She has, but they can't stay with us. A guest is not home, you know. Victor smiled contentedly and, hardly taking his eyes off Alice's brightly colored dress, muttered, "Tell Diana to come to me tomorrow morning. We'll solve all the issues and we'll help with the move. We have good, helpful people." "Thank you," Alice blurted out. "Thank you for brightening my morning," Victor smiled. After saying goodbye to the head of the village council, she rushed to work. Anna, having heard the latest news, just splashed her hands. What a surprise! And this Diana, I see it is not bad, and compared to her, Louis no longer seems a bad man. That's just it, Alice sighed, fixing her wavy strands. I didn't even realize she was living in her ex-husband's house, and Fiona had mentioned it. Maybe she forgot or didn't want to. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that they're leaving soon. You should know how tired I am. It's only been a couple of days, and I feel like this merry family has been living with us for a year. Anna smirked and struggled not to say anything. What about Alex? Is she still acting too clingy? Not in front of me. But I don't know what happens when I'm at work, Alice admitted. I'm also really stressed about her time off. I mean, she was going to work today, saying she couldn't stay home anymore. And now, it's like Diana's taking an unpaid vacation. But why? Didn't you realize? Anna asked cautiously. No, don't tell me. Anna waved her hands and remained silent. Alex doesn't see anything. Alice blurted out and began to wave her notebook around. He says that Diana is worried. It's hard for her. Empathizing with a stranger is a red flag. We started out the same way. And you know what happened next? Alice covered her face with her hands. She knew what Anna was implying, of course, but she didn't want to believe that the same thing could happen in her life. 10 years ago, Anna was happily married and had a long-awaited daughter. It seemed that all good things were just beginning. The baby was growing fast and becoming more and more interesting every day. Anna was busy at home, and her husband, Max, was moving up the ladder and had recently been promoted. But one cold winter morning turned Ola's life upside down. She found out that Max was having an affair. Anna expected anything from her husband, an apology, a new lie, but the husband only nodded silently, packed his things and left home, saying that finally met his love. When Anna learned that Max had fallen in love with her cousin Anna, she decided to quit serious relationships once and for all. She was afraid to fall in love, trusted no one else, and kept a decent distance. When I went on maternity leave, my friend was dumped by her boyfriend, Anna said quietly. I consoled her, often invited her to visit us, and was glad that she was getting better after talking to us. My daughter did not sleep well, and I remember that time in fragments. Perhaps because of sleep deprivation and fatigue, I didn't notice how she and Max sang together. Alice looked at Anna in all eyes and did not know what to say. Her friend did not like to remember this story, and even now, after so many years, tears came to her eyes. We are no longer in touch. I don't have a cousin anymore. But I trusted her, thought she was the best, shared my secrets. She even knew about all of our arguments with Max. Can you imagine what I did? Anna stopped talking and quickly added, don't let strangers into your life, even if they seem kind and sensitive, even if they help and support you. If you don't want to be in my shoes. Wasn't she ashamed? I don't know. The only good thing is that he left her with a baby in her arms, so I guess you could say we're even. A chill ran down Alice's spine. She looked at the saddened face of the bail bondsman and realized that Anna, unfortunately, quite right. July was unusually hot, and the rain that the locals had been waiting for had not fallen for more than 3 weeks. The car was stifling, and the wind blowing through the hot streets was no relief. Parking the car near her house, Alice noticed her daughter sitting on the bench. Hi, how was your day? Alice asked. Jenny looked sadly at her mom and said hello quietly. Hi, it was okay. I guess not everything is. Tell me what's wrong, Alice commanded, sitting down on the hot bench. Did your father scold you? No. Jenny. I don't like Aunt Diana. I don't like Maddie either. Why? They're complaining about me to Daddy. Maddie broke a cup today, and I'm the last one standing. Daddy banned me from watching TV for 2 days. When are they leaving, Mom? Soon, Alice sighed and hugged Jenny. I'll talk to Dad so he doesn't get mad, okay? Uh-huh. Come on, cheer up. You're fine, you're working. I'm here all day. Soon it'll start. Alice smiled. Archie will be off to daycare and you'll be back at school. The unit school? Yes. Come home. Let's drink tea with chocolate gingerbread. I stopped by the store. I know how much you love them. Alice took her daughter's hand and they walked slowly home. Archie was very happy to see his mother back, and that's why he was talking about the past day without stopping. Maddie was smiling happily too, but not at Alice, but at the big pile of gingerbread. Diana was as reserved as ever and seemed to be puzzled about something. At the table she was silent most of the time and answered questions with one-word answers or just shrugged her shoulders. Alice waited with difficulty until the children had gone into the room, and then she said, as if in passing, I stopped by Victor today. He said hello to everyone and promised to look for a place for Diana. Such a helpful man. How great. Alex was happy and looked at the day's guest. Diana, you will have a roof over your head. I should have turned to him at once. I didn't even think about it. Alice was good. Alice smiled and curiously followed the guest, who, judging by the sour expression on her face, was not happy about the news. Victor told me to come to him tomorrow morning, Alice continued. He promised to organize everything and even to solve the question of moving. Thanks, I'll go, Diana mumbled and began to stir the sugar in her tea. By the way, I almost forgot. He also said something about an investigation. It seemed to be dragging on indefinitely. Diana almost knocked over her cup of tea and now stared at Alice, unable to answer. Investigation? Alex was surprised. What kind of investigation? After the fire, they conduct an examination to find out the cause, shrugged Alice. You never know. Well, it's all clear here. Alex dismissed it. The wiring was no good. It's good that everyone is safe. Victor said that it could have been arson, stretching the words Alice said. Nonsense, Diana blurted out. Who would think of harming a simple librarian? I didn't run across anyone's path. I didn't borrow money. What about Louis? You think Louis did it? Alex asked incredulously. Alice hummed and stared at her guest absent-mindedly. The house was his. It was unlikely that Louis would burn his inheritance. Diana jumped to her feet so quickly that the chair she was sitting on fell to the floor with a clatter. Her cheeks were flaming, and her dark chocolate-colored eyes stared at the lady of the house. You're not an investigator. They'll figure it out for themselves, and there's no need to look for someone to blame. Alice didn't say anything like that. Alex stood up for his wife. But Diana wouldn't listen to him. She stepped over the chair on the floor and went into the big room, slamming the door loudly against the jamb. You shouldn't have done that, Alex whispered. They miraculously got out of the house. Don't you think that, Diana? I don't think anything, Alice said calmly and got up from the table. You should think less about Diana and more about your family. Alice, I can't wait for them to move in. Alex, open your eyes for God's sake. She's not who she says she is. What are you talking about? We'll put the kids to bed and I'll tell you everything. Without further ado, whispered Alice, glancing at the door of the big room. The house was quiet. Alex and Alice sat on the sofa and were silent. Finally, he couldn't stand it. Are you sure Fimona was telling the truth? That's not like Diana at all. She's so quiet. Alice snorted. Yeah, a quiet person. So you think she likes me? Alice shrugged. She was sitting on the edge of the couch in the long nightgown Alex had given her last March 8th. There was no makeup on her face, and her long dark hair was braided as usual. Alex looked at her and thought about something. You are as beautiful as you were when we first met. I loved you without makeup and hair, sleep-deprived and angry happy. And I love you now. You are the same Alice for whom I was ready to do anything. He was silent, watching his wife's eyes fill with tears. Do you really think that I would change you, the one who all these years took care of me and supported me, for some strange woman? He looked reproachfully at Alice, and then moved to her and pressed her against him. Alice sobbed and shook with sobs. She was so ashamed, but for some reason she felt incredibly good. Alex had never said anything like that before. Of course, Alice knew that her husband loved her, but he had never been a fan of loud words and believed that actions were much more important. When Alice was sick, Alex took all the household chores and treated her. When she was sad, listened and cheered her up. "I'm sorry," she exhaled, not letting him out of her embrace. "You're welcome." Alex quietly pulled away and added, "You know, Diana's behavior does seem a little strange, but I was always looking for excuses for her. When she is with you, she is silent most of the time, but when she is alone with me, she is babbling and trying to send the guys away. You're right, it's time for them to go out. But how do we get her to? Victor will find them a place to live, and then we'll move them out in no time." "I hope so," Alice sighed, "but I'll have to run around to make sure it happens as soon as possible." They got into bed and turned off the light. Alex was silent for a minute and then suddenly asked, "Do you think the fire was her fault?" "I don't know, but I'd like to believe she had nothing to do with it." "Why?" "I feel sorry for Maggie, and that would be too much, even for Diana." "Diana!" shouted Alice, knocking at the guest's room. "It's time to go." "Where to?" Diana asked, yawning, not opening her eyes. "To the head of the village council." "I'll go later." Alice opened the door to the big room and, seeing the sleepy face of her guest, said, "Get ready. I'll drive you." She said it in such a tone that Diana dared not interfere. With a grunt and a groan, she rose to her feet and went to wash her face. And Maddie, hearing the noise, asked fearfully, "Where is Mommy? Is it still night?" "It's morning. It's just the curtains are too thick. Your mom and I are going to run some errands, and then she'll come home. Go get some rest. It's still a long way from breakfast." Smiling, Maddie collapsed into the pillows and stretched sweetly. She looked like such a sweet and fragile little girl that Alice instantly felt guilty. She was embarrassed by her actions. It was one thing to kick a grown woman out of the house and quite another to kick a child out. Calming herself with the fact that Diana could handle all the problems on her own, Alice closed the door behind her and went into the kitchen. "What's wrong?" "You're not wearing your face," Alex said in a low voice. He was sitting at the table and drinking coffee, trying to finally wake up. "You know, I'm so ashamed." "I realize it's nothing, but still," whispered Alice. "I was taught from childhood to help people. And now what? I'd do anything to get them to move out." "There's a reason for that. If Diana were, say Fiona, you'd stick with her to the end." Alice smiled. "Fiona would have bargained Victor for a place to live by morning. Wouldn't want to embarrass anyone. I don't even doubt it." "Are you kidding?" "Tell me about it. I'll laugh for the company," Diana said, entering the kitchen. She sat down at the table and looked at Alice with undisguised irritation. "Did you really think that I cannot go to the village council by myself?" asked the guest. "Or am I so annoying? Just say the word and we'll leave." Alex opened his mouth in surprise and, noticing the confusion on his wife's face, said conciliatingly, "We're just worried about you and Maddie. There's not much time left before the cold weather. What if the house turns out to be bad? We'll have to insulate, prepare." "All right," Diana said and smiled. "I'm really sorry to embarrass you, but I'm even glad I did. Alice, you're the most loyal friend." "Me?" Alice squeaked. Yes, Diana continued. "I haven't had a single friend since we've lived in this village. It just didn't work out. They're jealous. I don't know. It's true what they say. A friend is a friend in need. So you helped me." Diana smiled sweetly, and Alex quickly left the table and went to the fridge for bread, so as not to laugh. "Thank you," was all Alex could say. "Well, have breakfast and let's go. I still have to go to work. By the way, will you stay home again today?" "Yes, I'll stay till the end of the week. I'll help Alex with the housekeeping and the kids. I don't know how he manages on his own." "That's a good husband you've got there, Alice." Alice nodded quickly and went to wait for her newfound friend outside. The coolness and freshness of the early morning made her stop on the porch. The sun was rising behind the woods, the clouds were blushing, and the morning fog, flowing like a weightless blanket, made it a fairy tale. Alice slowly descended the wooden steps and, throwing off her sandals, walked on the wet grass, which still showed tiny drops of dew. Her feet felt cool, but at the same time so good. Breathing in the incomparable aroma of freshness of this morning, Alice tried to remember it well, so that later, on cold winter evenings, she could remember this short, but so sweet summer. She struggled to put on her shoes and get into the car. Diana was still gone, and Alice thought with sadness that she was busy all the time and lived without noticing anything around her. She hadn't admired the sunrise for a long time, and she couldn't remember the last time she and Alexei had walked under the setting sun, holding hands. It seemed that life was passing by, and she was still spinning in one place and had no time for anything. Suddenly, Alice noticed Diana in the rearview mirror. "Let's go." Diane jumped up and down on the seat. "I hope they'll give us a decent house. I don't want to live in a leaky shack." Victor promised to find a suitable place. If he promised, it'll be fine. Alice glanced at the passenger in the short summer dress, sighed heavily, and pressed the gas pedal. When they pulled up outside the village hall, Victor had just gotten to work. When he saw the visitors, he smiled. "Good morning, I'm late today." "Good morning, Victor," Diana chirped, fixing her hair. "We're early." Alice couldn't sleep. I see. "Well, come in." Once in the stuffy office, Alice sat down on an empty chair and asked impatiently, "Did you find any accommodation for Diana and Marty?" "Yes," nodded the head of the village council. "There are two options. A one-room apartment in our two-story building or a house across the river. You can move into the room. There is a good repair and some furniture, but the house is not so simple." "What kind of house?" Diana was interested. "Maria Robajkina. It suits me." "Wait," shook her head Alice. "Maria hasn't lived in the village for 2 years at least. The house must be in shambles, and there must be a lot of repairs." "It does need repairs," Victor grudgingly agreed. "That's why I would recommend the apartment." Diana jumped up from her chair and said, "We'll do the repairs. And I don't want to go into a 2-story building. There will be no problems with it. Come on, Alice, let's go." "Diane, don't make a rash decision. Think it over carefully," Victor began. "And by the way, be home tonight. They wanted to talk to you about the fire." "Who?" Diana recoiled. "The investigator, apparently. Something's going on over there." Without saying anything, Diana quickly left the office. "Everything okay in there?" Victor asked cautiously. She seemed nervous. She didn't sleep well. "Thank you for your help," Alice blurted out and left. When she went outside, she saw Diana sitting on a rock nearby. Her expression was pensive and her eyes were fixed on one point. "Worried about the investigation?" "No," Diana answered quickly, "thinking about the repairs." "It's not going to happen. It takes money and time to rebuild Maria's house. Take the apartment. It's better than nothing." "We'll see." "Diana, you have to take it." "Are you kicking me out?" "No, I just don't see the point in turning your nose up at it," Alice sneered. "You're in the wrong position. Of course, we could throw out all options and move in with your mom. She lives in the neighboring village, doesn't she?" "How do you know?" Diana gasped. "One of the neighbors mentioned it, a long time ago. She doesn't have room for us. The house is tiny." "I'll manage without her help," Diana said. "You drive to work, I'll walk." "What about the apartment?" "Let's get an apartment. I don't care anymore." Without saying goodbye, she quickly walked away. When she got to work, Alice told Anna what had happened. "That's how Diana is." Anna shook her head. "Let her move into an apartment and be happy that she was offered a place to live at all. You, I think, will run ahead of her with boxes, just so that her favorite friend quickly celebrated the housewarming." "You say the same thing," sighed Alice. "I can't get over that fire." "Do you think she burned down the house? But even if she did, why? If you hadn't called her to your house, she and her daughter would have been left on the street. Diana has no friends, and her relatives have cut her out of their lives. What good would that do?" "If I knew, I have to stop by Fiona's house today. I promised her some cottage cheese and milk, so I'll ask her what's going on with the house." Anna nodded and smiled. "Hopefully by Monday, the freeloaders will have moved out and you'll finally be as happy as you were before." When the workday was over, Alice arrived home and wanted to go straight to Fiona's house, but everything went wrong. Alex was in the big room reading the book to the children, and Diana was nowhere to be seen. "Hi," Alice said. "Hello?" "Mommy." Archie was happy and rushed into her arms. "How was your day?" she asked, looking at the pensive expression on Alex's face. Dashenka, please finish the chapter, and I'll pour tea for Mommy." Giving the book to her daughter, Alex took Alice's hand and led her to the kitchen. "I need to take the cottage cheese to Fiona," Alice started. "Diana is in the district center." "Why?" "She's suspected of arson. The coroner came to see her. I didn't even think it was her." "Did she confess?" Alice recoiled. "No, but you should have seen her face. It was unbelievable. She was there with Marty, and if they hadn't run out in time, I don't understand anything." Alex sat down at the table and stared at Alice. "I shouldn't have believed you." "Maybe Diana wasn't involved. I don't know for sure," Alice said in a low voice. "What would happen to Marty if she did?" "Marty thinks Mom's away on business, so we'll just have to keep a straight face. You go to Fiona's like you wanted, and I'll watch the kids. I don't know if Diana's coming back tonight." Alice was so dumbfounded by what was happening that she didn't remember to put the cottage cheese in a bag and prepared a can of milk and ran outside. It took her a couple of minutes to get to Fiona. The local resident was sitting on the porch, in the shade of dark green leaves of wild grapes, and was looking through a magazine. When she saw Alice, she took off her glasses and smiled. "Good evening, Alice. What are you doing here?" "Hello, Fiona. I promised to bring some cottage cheese and milk." Alice put the bag on the wooden step and asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell me about the fact that Diana had nothing to do with the house she lived in?" "Didn't I tell you?" Fiona was surprised. "What a sclerosis. I'm doing crossword puzzles, practicing my memory, but I guess it's no use. Come in, we'll have tea, and I'll explain everything. I'm in a hurry. Alex is alone with the kids, and I've got a lot of work to do." "Alone? Where's Diana?" "The investigator came today." Alice sighed and told her neighbor what had happened. When she heard that Diana was suspected of arson, Fiona covered her mouth with her hand and rounded her eyes. "I warned her." "Warned her about what?" Alice didn't understand. Fiona looked around worriedly, then put the magazine aside and motioned for Alice to sit down on the step. The older woman pondered for a moment, then said, "Louis is a good man. His mother Selena and I were friends, but she left early. She was very ill. I think you remember her. She was a kind woman, kind-hearted. Louis then lived in the city and just started dating his first wife, Catherine, when Selena was gone. Catherine at that time was full of admirers, beautiful, educated, and in addition the daughter of one of the local businessmen. She stood out strikingly against the background of others. However, as her parents did not dissuade her parents to marry a country boy, Catherine did not listen to them. At first everything went well, and she and Louis lived soul to soul. But when the youngest child was 2 years old, Louis filed for divorce. For Catherine, this news was a blow. She loved her husband very much and up to the last believed that he would come to his senses. But Louis, in love with Diana, without regret trampled all the light that was in his life and left, leaving his wife with 2 children. Louis brought Diana to his mother's house, Fiona continued. He renovated the house, planted a vegetable garden, and made it so organized that we were amazed. Diana became pregnant and soon Mady was born. I was really happy for Diana. But a year later, Louis suddenly left and never came back. He left his wife and daughter a house, though they lived in it on birds' rights. But still, Fiona got quiet and suddenly added, "A month ago, Louis showed up and told Diana he was going to sell the house." "What?" Alice gasped. "He needed money, either for a car or to buy a place somewhere else. Anyway, it didn't matter. When Diana found out, she came running to me. She asked me to change his mind." Fiona grinned. "He respects me, and of course he'll listen to me. I told her to find a place to live. Is it a good idea to pry into someone else's life and talk a grown man out of selling his own house?" "And she didn't listen?" muttered Alice, looking away. Fiona said, "They came to see me the other day too. They asked about Diana, what kind of person she is, what her relationship with her ex-husband is. I honestly didn't believe Diane would do such a thing. To be outraged and make a scene is her style, but to start a fire." Fiona put the Scrabble magazine on her lap and smoothed the page. She was beyond upset, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. "What? Am I going to tell her mother?" Fiona suddenly asked. Even though they don't know each other, Betty is still worried. She even asked me to keep an eye on her daughter. "Let's hope it's the wiring," Alice muttered. She glanced at her watch and realized, "I'm sorry, I have to go home. Call me when Diana gets back from the district center." Otherwise, I won't sleep until I know everything is all right. I will. Goodbye, Fiona. Leaving the grocery bag on the porch, Alice ran to the gate. She tried to keep her head down so as not to upset Fiona, who didn't seem to be angry with Diana anymore, but was genuinely worried about her. The sun was setting, and in the field in the middle of the village 2 stray cows were plucking grass, unwilling to go home. The warm west wind was blowing in her face. The hay smelled pleasant, and it was so good that she didn't want to hurry anywhere. After passing the neighbors' houses, Alice came to her home gate and pulled the handle of the gate, hoping that Diana had already returned. "Alice, are you?" Alex shouted, waving his hand at her from the side of the vegetable garden. "The guys and I are managing." Alice hurried to her husband. "Where is Diana?" Alex shrugged his shoulders and looked at Maddie, who was diligently raking the scattered hay into a pile. "We decided to do it together," the husband said, as if nothing had happened. "Maddie tried milking the cow, and Archie wanted fresh milk and bread. I had to send the girls out for mugs and loaves." "Have you never milked?" Alice asked thoughtfully. Maddie smiled and, shaking her head, informed. "We didn't have a cow, just chickens." "Okay, Alex, I need to call her." Alice nodded and headed for the porch, but no matter how many times she dialed Diana's number, a monotonous female voice answered her that the caller was temporarily unavailable. When it was time to go to bed, Diana never showed up. With a heavy heart, Alice put Maddie to rest and sat and waited until she fell into a restless sleep. Alice did not dare to call Fiona and upset her even more. Alice woke up to a sharp noise. Sitting up in bed, she looked at her husband sleeping next to her and thought at first that she had imagined it. However, after a couple of seconds, voices were heard outside the window. Alice jumped to her feet and carefully pulled back the curtain. There was a car on the road, and Diana and a man standing near it. They exchanged a few words, and Diana hurried to the house. "Alex, wake up," whispered Alice, trying to wake up her husband. "What is it?" "Diana is here." Alex instantly opened his eyes. "Diana, what time is it?" "It's still night. Get up." Alex pulled on his shorts and they left the room. There was a scraping sound from the hay. Apparently, Diana was trying to get into the house. "Why are you locking yourself in?" Diana asked angrily as Alice turned the key in the keyhole and let her in. The house is on the outskirts of the city. In the dim light of the lamp, Diana seemed exhausted and very tense. With trembling hands, she took off her shoes and wanted to go to her room, but Alice stopped her. "Will you explain what's going on? You've been gone all evening. We were worried." "It's nothing. I'll pack my things and we'll go." To the apartment? Alex didn't understand. Nothing is ready there, and it's strange to start moving in the middle of the night. Diana gave him a displeased look and sneered. "I'm going to my mother's. You wanted to get rid of me as soon as possible, so here you are, and don't worry about your things. There's a car waiting for me and Maddie at the house." "Who are you here with?" "A friend." "Well, I don't have time to talk. I'm going to go pack up Maddie." "Why don't we wait till morning?" Alice suggested and asked. "What did the investigator tell you?" "Nothing. I'm in a hurry." Not wanting to talk anymore, Diana went into the big room. She said something to Maddie, shouting at her for her sluggishness, and Alice froze in place, not knowing how to understand such behavior. Alex was the first to wake up. "This sounds like an escape. But what's the point?" Alice whispered. "She and her mother do not communicate, which means that Diana lied to us and will not go to her. And who's the friend in the car? Where did he come from?" "I don't know. One thing I can tell you for sure, it's not Louis." At that moment, a disheveled Diane burst out of the great room. She was holding a travel bag in one hand and clutching her daughter's hand in the other. Maddie was yawning desperately and squinting against the bright light. "Mom, where are we going?" "I want to sleep." "You can sleep later." "Diana," Alice exclaimed, "your departure has something to do with the visit to the investigator." With flashing eyes, Diana sent her daughter to the hayloft, and then closing the door behind her, whispered, "If it did, then what? So the wiring had nothing to do with it?" Alice recoiled. "Why did you do it?" "Louis abandoned me, swapped me for someone else, and left me penniless. If you knew what it cost me to get a job as a librarian in this remote village with no education. The only thing he left us was his mother's house. He promised to give it to Maddie." Diana's eyes filled with tears, And now he's changed his mind and told us to find another place to live. Do you think I regret what I did? No, not at all. She jumped out into the hay, and in a minute dazed Alex and Alice heard the roar of a car leaving. Alice, someone's here to see you. Not realizing where she was and what time it was, Alice struggled to open her eyelids and saw Alex in front of her. Fiona's here, he continued. She's in such a state that if I were you, I'd get up, and quickly. She wouldn't even take tea. It's about Diana, Alice moaned as she struggled to sit up in bed. I promised to call when Diana comes back from the investigator. It's going to be a fun conversation, I imagine. Should I stay, or should I go back to the police station? Alice sent her husband outside and began frantically dressing. Not knowing how to behave or what to say, she walked into the kitchen and stopped, noticing the stern look of her neighbor. Fiona drummed her fingers on the table and her expression didn't bode well. You promised. How hard is it to call? Diana's gone. I know. You said she was in the district center, but now though. She came back tonight, quickly packed her things and left again with her daughter, Alice said confusedly, sitting down opposite, said as if she was going to her mother's house. Fiona looked at Alice with all her eyes and didn't know what to say. They couldn't have gone to Betty's, she said quietly. But why would she go anywhere at all when we were going to prepare a 2-story apartment for them today? Sighing heavily, Alice told her neighbor about Diana's confession of arson. Unthinkable, Fiona muttered, clutching her hands to her head. She's going to be found. Doesn't she realize that? What do we do now, Alice? For starters, let's have some tea and calm down. Diana's a grown woman and wants what's best for her daughter, so she'll try to make sure nothing happens to Maddie. Maybe she really did go to her mom's. Where's your cell phone? I'll call Betty. It's on the nightstand by the door. The neighbor jumped up from her seat and, finding the receiver, began to dial the number she knew by heart. There was silence, broken only by faint beeps. Betty, it's Fiona. Fiona hasn't come to see you. The neighbor began and immediately fell silent. No way, but... Alice looked at the older woman's worried face in surprise and forgot how to breathe. Of course. You do not worry. If necessary, I will come, Fiona continued to say into the phone. Goodbye, dear. Putting the phone back down, she turned around and blurted out, Maddie's at Bethy's. Diana had gotten her mother up in the middle of the night and told her she would keep her granddaughter for a couple days and then come back. Betty couldn't say no. So they had made up. Alice gasped. I don't know. But Betty said it was all right. She'd never seen Maddie before. Where's that naughty girl gone to? Where's that? Fiona asked angrily. It had been exactly 1 week since Diana had left the Carpots' house that fateful night. Maddie was still at her grandmother's house, waiting for her mother, who never showed up. They started from scratch. Betty was incredibly happy, and Maddie was just glad that she had such a kind and sympathetic grandmother. Never before had the girl eaten such delicious pies, never listened to so many interesting stories, and never knew that the ordinary word grandmother can mean so much. That morning, as usual, Alice went to work. But as she got into the car, she suddenly noticed a familiar figure hurrying toward their house. Fiona waved at her, beckoning her to wait. Wait, darling. Fiona spoke up, out of breath. Did you hear what happened? No, Alice answered cautiously. What is it? Diana has been found, and she will have to answer for what she has done. I don't know what will happen now, but I'm afraid for Maddie. Lou doesn't need her because he's seeing someone else now, and Betty is old enough. Would she be willing to keep the girl, if anything? I don't know. Do you think Diane's going to be sent? Spit, Fiona interrupted her. I hope Lou will take pity on her, but who knows how it will be. She sighed heavily and added, It's a good thing she left you and didn't have time to do anything. I was worried about you and Alex. Diana will not stop at anything if money is at stake, because for the sake of them twice already went to the wedding. And that man who drove her and Maddie. Alice muttered, Who was he? Her first husband. Alice opened her mouth in surprise, and Fiona shrugged and said, I can imagine Betty's face when she saw her daughter's old friend. Maddie will stay at her grandmother's house for the time being. She'll probably go to school there too. Betty has forgiven her wayward daughter and even promised to let her live with her. She's stepping on the same rake again. But what can you do? She's her own daughter, after all. After saying goodbye, Fiona slowly wandered toward home, and Alice went to work. All the way to the district center, she could not get out of her mind the words of her neighbor and thought about Diana. Anna noticed at once that Alice was not herself and waited until there were no extra ears in the office to find out what was wrong. "I understand Betty," Anna admitted. "She's a daughter. Imagine yourself in Betty's shoes. Would you forgive her?" "Of course she would. I really hope Diana realizes how much she's loved and stops acting like a whimsical little girl." "I don't think so. People like her don't change." Anna looked at Alice carefully and, lowering her voice, said, "Be careful from now on, Alice. You don't need such friends." Alice nodded silently. She realized that she had almost ruined her family with a rash act, allowing the woman she didn't know to live in the house for an indefinite period of time. "What about Alex? He's not upset." "He is only glad that now he can walk around the house without shorts," grinned Alice, "and the kids are happy too. Jenny said that it's much calmer without guests. No one quarrels, and you can relax." "Good for you." "Did you really think Alex was capable of cheating? Who knows what's on another person's mind?" Anna answered with a question to a question. "I hope for the best, that's all. But after the betrayal of my sister and my ex-husband, I hope only for myself. It's easier that way." She smiled slightly and started to work. Strong, independent, real. 6 months passed. Mady was still living with her grandmother and attending the local village school. Betty loved the girl with all her heart, and only for her sake tolerated the antics of Diana, who, in fact, got away with it, except for a fine and compulsory labor. Louis sold the lot where his family home once stood and married for the 3rd time, hoping that this marriage would be his last. He promised to help Mady with money and to take her to town periodically, but nothing more. Diane hadn't changed a bit. She worked as a janitor at the local school and searched for her happiness, believing that it lies in men. Alice celebrated another wedding anniversary with her husband. Afterwards, she swore to herself never to let strangers into the house again and broke it only once, when it was time to say goodbye to Fiona, whom she loved and cherished very much.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.